Right. See how this goes. We are in Washington, D.C. What does this say? My review. Seen a lot of chalk. That's interesting. In our view, it crosses a constitutional line that Mr. Trump hasn't previously crossed. It is impeachable. The Wall Street Journal editorial board. It's interesting. Somebody chalked a quote from the Wall Street Journal editorial board. I'll have to check and make sure that quote is an actual quote. That is a sidewalk right here in front of the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. I have just come back to D.C., returning to the scene of the crime. I've been in Virginia in a motel, one of those like Hampton, whatever kind of things. I've just been writing and downloading and combing Twitter and watching videos and cross-referencing them with everything that I saw when I was here on Wednesday, here being at the Capitol, and little did I know, inside the Capitol, which for those of you who are just hop-ons, who have just come on and don't know who I am or what the heck I'm doing, I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn, and publicreport.org is my publication. And here we are at the Capitol, and there's something interesting that I see besides the flag at half-mast that we'll talk about in a bit. But I've just, as I said, I've been in Virginia just writing and editing. There are a couple of brand new interviews that I posted from Wednesday, January 6th, on publicreport.org. And that's under publicreport.org/capital with a O. Publicreport.org, capital. I have, let's see, how many? Four really interesting interviews. One of them is from one of the first two women that went into the Capitol on Wednesday. And they called themselves, I interviewed them, I want to say, in like the 4 o'clock hour. I got here on Wednesday a little late. I was here in the 2 o'clock hour. Things had been already going since 1. When I got here, for those of you who have followed me on Twitter, at J Lee Quinn, and for those of you who have watched the videos on publicreport.org, I start out that first video. You see I have an American flag handkerchief because I actually forgot I have two masks. I had my gas mask, which I left in my car, because I did not think I would need it, because anybody who's been covering this stuff for the last 7 months, the MAGA rallies during the daytime never were like this. I'll certainly say. I'll get back to that in a second. Or first, the videos at publicreport.org/capital with an O. There are 4 interviews. The first women that went in were from a group called Praying Grandmas. They're old, and you'll see in the video, they're celebrating. They don't know yet. There's been rumors that someone's been shot and killed at the time that they're celebrating, but they don't know that it's true. So it's a really interesting video because they're doubting everything I'm telling them because they don't trust the mainstream media. That's the Praying Grandmas interview. And that's the first interview. The second is an activist named Philip. He's a black conservative dude. I think he's originally from Texas, but he's the guy who got his teeth punched out by Berkeley Antifa in, and they actually, that's one of the first leftist attacks where they got hate crime charges on them. The activist was like a BLM Berkeley Antifa dude who punched out the 2 front teeth of Philip before the rally, which was on October the 17th in San Francisco, even began. The black bloc kind of surrounded him and punched his 2 front teeth out. He did the rally for about 10 minutes, but people were throwing bottles at him, and they had to cancel it. So that's the story of Philip. Philip is my second interview on that page. And there's a unidentified patriot at the end who gives like a rousing kind of yell to my camera. It's a very interesting interview, but Philip is covered in tear gas. He says he's almost been crushed to death. That's when we knew we were getting, anybody who went up there. And then the third person is Villain. Villain is from the Pacific Northwest, and he's a live streamer. And he is a conservative live streamer. And Villain is an interesting person who I've seen around in different cities and followed his live streams. And he's the third person that's interviewed. And you can see all these memorials here. We're going to get to this. The memorials were over there back on Thursday. So they've all been moved, it looks like, over here. We'll take a look. Or wait. Those... Interesting. The memorials that were over there are gone now. Those were the memorials for the 4 that had died in the rioting. But all right, we're going to check this out, see what memorials are still here and which ones have been removed. That's really interesting. So I was talking about the interview with Villain. He was right next to the woman named Roseanne when she died. And that's the third video that's on my website, publicreport.org/capital with an O. And again, I'm at J. Lee Quinn. Please connect with me on Twitter and feel free to ask some questions. Live viewers show up. This is an example. Yeah, I don't see any questions or anything yet, but if you have any, do ask. This is what I thought was interesting. Look at the flag. The flags that are there, I wonder if they're ceremonial to the inauguration usually. You can see the scaffolding there that if you looked on my Twitter, I was scaling that scaffolding myself. And then I came down it on the interior, which was kind of crazy to do, especially because I had cowboy boots on. But this fence wasn't here. Of course, I don't think they expected, even though the rhetoric, I looked at some of the wildprotest.com flyers, and they were pretty tame, except for one said the storm is coming, and it showed like lightning hitting the Capitol and rain and everything. So you really don't know if it's metaphorical. There was nothing that I saw that was explicit. If you have anything that was really explicit, any material that said, hey, we're going to tear the Capitol down or whatever, feel free. I know there was chatter of it, but you just didn't. I didn't, I was, as I said, I arrived without my gas mask and even my regular mask, my COVID protection mask. I left that too. So I just was not prepared. I think people were really treating the protests casually because we expected all the violence to be at night. Because you got to understand two things that are really important about how things have gone down here in DC in November and December. When I was here December the 12th, everything during the day at Freedom Plaza, the MAGA stuff, totally peaceful. It's just MAGA. But then it was at night that, and this happened in November, on November the 14th, when the Freedom Plaza Million MAGA March 1 ended, everybody was going back to their hotels, and that's when they got attacked by the Black Bloc. The Black Bloc, because it's Black Bloc, it's unindividuated. You really don't know who stands for what, but they primarily are acting under anti-fascism and Black Lives Matter, what conservatives call Antifa. But again, Antifa is a little bit of a misnomer because you have different groups that are not under centralized organization. But as I said, Philip got his 2 front teeth knocked out by Berkeley Antifa-led Black Bloc, quote unquote, counter-protesting. So anyway, let's take a look around. I'll stop talking and we'll get a look. It has a solemn atmosphere. But yeah, I was saying, because of November and December and the pattern, which was that you had peaceful protests during the day at Freedom Plaza, Million MAGA March 1 and Million MAGA March 2. Because of that, the fighting was expected to be at night. That's why I didn't even take my gas mask, because I thought I was like, oh, I'll save it for later. I slept in because I was like, I'm probably going to be up until 1 a.m. watching people fight in the streets. the pattern was all the fighting between the Proud Boys or MAGA aligned people, because not everybody who fights is a Proud Boy. All of that was expected Wednesday night. And of course, it didn't happen because we just had this cataclysmic event, which I don't know. I mean, the people obviously who came prepared to do it had that in mind, who showed up with zip ties or here's an interesting thing, and I'm trying to get Metropolitan Police Department to clarify this for me, but I have a report that only 5 gun arrests were made, which is interesting because for that demographic of people who, you imagine were there, only 5 gun arrests. It's interesting. Let's look at some of these comments. You see the massive generators. Oh gosh, I missed all these comments. Villain and Philip were in the group that harassed Lindsay. Yeah, I saw that video of Villain, and they were calling Lindsey Graham. And so it's interesting because Villain has been kind of, I mean, I knew he leaned right. I didn't know that he was like, oh wow, he's going after Lindsey Graham, right? But he does have that. I asked him straight up when we did a joint live stream from here on Wednesday night afterwards, because I'm on the left, he's on the right. We thought we'd have a dialogue conversation, and he was challenging me on my Biden vote, and I asked him if he thought the election was stolen. And he said that it felt that way. It was more of a feeling, like he didn't have any exact evidence or anything, but I think the distrust in the system from the right, this is what the news should be talking about. Globalization was a concern, corporate media, but also big tech censorship was huge for everybody who was here on Wednesday. And now we're getting exactly that. A couple of groups have been banned that are conservatives. I noticed that a group called Walk Away, which was started by a gay Democrat who wanted to leave the Republican Party. Leave the Democratic Party for the Republican Party. Over 2 years, he had like 500,000, or no, 50,000 was it? 50,000 maybe. A lot of people. And testimonial videos, and Facebook shut it all down just because they were preparing for this rally, which I think is an interesting story. I need to look into it more, but big tech censorship in general, we should all be afraid of, in my opinion. Not be afraid of, but we should all speak out against. My solution for the president was don't actually censor his Twitter. Limit him to 7 characters per tweet. Then he'll just sound like even more of a crazy person. So that's my hot take there. What else do we got? The villain was in Graham's face. I watched that video. I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah, I think he went into the story, and having the woman die next to him, Roseanne, he came out here and it's gone, but he set up a memorial there, and there's stuff on the other side, so it might have been moved, but he set up a memorial. You can look at my old live stream from Thursday night, I think it was. Was it Wednesday night or Thursday night? It's all blurring together to me right now. But he and I think we live streamed 2 different nights together. He set up a memorial, and they laid out candles in the formation of a cross for the at the time, it wasn't known about the officer. So it was the 4 who had passed that were in the riot action amidst it. But Villain had, he watched her, and that's on publicreport.org/capital with an O. He watched her die. He was trying to get a pulse. So I think Villain was carrying a lot when he went into that airport and saw Lindsey Graham. So I'm not surprised that he was in the face. De-escalate. How do we de-escalate the situation? I think we need to have conversations across, like me talking to Villain. If you look at my podcast, which is, you see the logo this way, right here, Unblocked Podcast is my podcast. There's only 5 episodes up, but I got a lot of heat for one of them because I interview Enrique Tarrio of the Proud Boys, and I talked to him and I have dialogue with him. Again, even though we're very different, but it's interesting. Univision interviewed Enrique Tarrio live. Univision is the biggest Spanish network It's even bigger than Telemundo in its reach. And they interviewed Enrique Tarrio on Wednesday night. After I left the Capitol after the riot, I went to a Salvadorian restaurant to get some food. I was starving, and I saw that the live interview with Jorge Ramos was interviewing Tarrio, and I just popped in and started watching that. And he was switching back and forth between Spanish and English and stuff. I used to work for Univision actually as a cameraman. Do you see Massive Generators? I don't. No, I don't. Along with Express. Okay, I get that reference. I get that. I see what you're doing there. I see what you're doing. Yeah, I mean, Philip is a little bit of a provocateur. You know, the thing you have to notice, especially with bloggers, is some of them are in it, especially the younger ones, for the views. I've never done anything for like any sort of clout or trying to get a video that goes viral. In fact, my strategy has been to be below the radar and have as little heat, as little notice as possible, because that allows me to go longer. As soon as I get too noticed, it's going to be harder for me to move around and get the story. So the goal was to last to the inauguration, and then reevaluate at that point. So there is an advantage to not, I don't know if you guys heard on Brett Weinstein's podcast, I talk about a reporter that we had a little bit of a dust up. He's this guy, Robert Evans, in the Pacific Northwest, and he's basically a radical, but he submits articles, and so he gets quoted in major establishments, and he has a article in Business Insider talking about how this was all a failure of law enforcement. He's an activist. He's anti-cop. He's pro-Antifa, and he's embedded with the Portland crew. At 2:15 p.m., he and other activists are tweeting, if this was a Black Lives Matter protest, they would have fired at them with live rounds, is what they're tweeting. You know, and the other point was they wouldn't be able to walk in or whatever. That was later. And then I tweeted back at him and I said, because he didn't know then, I said, yeah, they did. They killed a woman, you know, and we have to stop. I was in the middle of it. So when you're in the middle of it, just like Villain talking to Lindsey Graham, you know, that's when you have to be careful not to let your emotions in. But I did. And I was like, they took every technique that you all developed in the Pacific Northwest and they used it. But you know what they had? They were united and they had leadership. That leadership being the President of the United States, essentially, who made this happen, in my opinion. Because this was a trajectory that came straight from him emotionally and so forth. So let's see, what else we got? You've been to Iraq and Afghanistan, don't want running gun battles in this country. Yeah, this situation is a powder keg. I think you're absolutely right. I think the situation, somebody asked before, is you've got to start talking to people on the other side. And the media needs to do that. And this is how the media needs to address it. If you're a media house, let's say you're the Raw Story. I'll call out Raw Story right now, a liberal tabloid. You need to start hiring conservatives. You need diversity of thought in your newsroom, not diversity of well, I mean, it's good to have diversity, but you need diversity of thought. If you're just, the way the system is set up is this, or these tribal echo chambers where content goes viral if it's shared among identifying, you know, identitarian groups, you know. So how do we get across this? We have to make content more interesting. We have to put a value on content that's more interesting, like this, so that, you know, my dinky little live stream here, or, you know, Brett Weinstein conversations that I've had. We've actually had 3. One of them hasn't been published yet. It's going to be very interesting to look at it because it was shot when I was in Minneapolis from a hotel room talking to Brett, episode 2 was, and I'm debriefing from December the 12th. So that was everything that led up to this. So when we talk about December the 12th, it's going to be an interesting dissection that sets up what happened here on Wednesday, January the 6th. So I think you need diversity of thought. You need it in institutions. You don't want publications that are where everybody thinks the same. Unfortunately, that's where people are making money online. But that profit margin of what you make on what ad click revenue, how how much money is that really that we're talking in the end, and how worth it is it in the sense that it completely divides our country and it has us emotionally crazy, unwilling to accept information, just sort of yell at each other and not think. It is a powder keg. I agree. I agree. Don't promote a diversity of truth and lies. I don't know what that means. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Don't promote a diversity of truth and lies. That's an interesting point. One of my points on my Twitter at J Lee Quinn, if you go, one of my points that I talk about, two of my points. First point, I say we need to get people into homeownership, especially in lower income communities. What prevents people from owning their homes is the money for the down payment. So some cities like Denver and Los Angeles have very small programs that help people get subsidized down payments. Because if you get the down payment and you're in a steady job, then you can own the home. So that's one of my first points. Second point that I make is in high school, we got to teach not only financial literacy, we got to teach journalism, but non-opinion journalism. The idea of approaching a story and learning about a story empirically through I'm going to give you everything that I learned when I was in high school. I was the editor of my school paper when I was in the senior year, my senior year, but junior year was my first year in journalism. This is what I learned. Know the difference between objective and subjective material. What is an opinion and what is clear objective reporting. On publicreport.org, I'm doing clear objective reporting. On the podcasts, I'm being subjective. I'm telling my experience. But if you go to publicreport.org, all the evidence is laid out on my private Facebook page, I'm also giving opinions. That's okay. People should have opinions, but you should know when it's an opinion and when it's empirical truth. And part of the mess that we're in is that we're in this one anarchist that I interviewed called the era we are in is post-truth. It's post-truth in that nobody knows who to trust. So teach journalism in high school. I think it's going to be important so that you don't promote a diversity of lies, certainly. Does he pay you for this? No, I don't make any money on this. Look, I'm a guy in my 40s. I don't have a family or anything. And I always, a little bit about me, like I've always pursued the arts. Like I had, a fringe acting career. I started out as an on-camera reporter. I didn't like it. After like 10 years, I kind of walked away from it because you kind of report the same old stories. And I could see where journalism was going, that it wasn't, people were detaching from it. People didn't trust the news anymore. I started to notice that as a reporter. I would get scorned out in the streets. Like people would be like the mainstream media and stuff. And so then I decided to become a cameraman. So anyways, as a person of my circumstance, I got furloughed from my job. I was a working cameraman in Los Angeles for Univision. And I got furloughed in May. I was on the front lines during COVID when we thought, like during the initial lockdown, when we thought a lot of things. And then after that, I got furloughed because they were just going through cuts and stuff. And then I was in Santa Monica on May the 31st, and I watched coordinated rioting happen right in front of me. And I'd just been surfing. So I was standing there in like board shorts and flip-flops. And everybody that was rioting didn't think I was mainstream media. From that day, I've always shot on my phone, just me, and I haven't made a cent from any of this. But, my goal was, at least through the inauguration, I'm not going to monetize anything. Because that's the other thing. You get attacked as a grifter. That's the Twitter slur for anybody who is trying, monetizes, like has a Patreon or any of that stuff, which is like everybody. But they call you a grifter. They call Andy Ngo the big grifter because he is conservative. He is a partisan, and he has a mission, which is to make Antifa, look dangerous. And I certainly, there's lots that I've seen that shows that there is danger. But objective reporting, I think, is what we need right now. And so publicreport.org is my objective reporting. Unblocked podcast and being a guest on Brett Weinstein is my opportunity to present my objective reporting, but also give subjective opinion. The other thing I learned in journalism class, junior year, was the difference between a primary source and a secondary source. So everything that I get is from a primary source, mostly when I talk to people that are on the ground, that are right there, that are experiencing. So there's a big difference between that, and a lot of stories that are being written now are being written in quarantine, where you have young writers who are working for even CNN or BuzzFeed or whatever, and they're armchair keyboard warriors. They go through the Twitter feed and then they come up with a story that fits their point of view. A lot of them have, and I'll get into that later, how diversity, I talked to Brett Weinstein about that, how diversity was framed, or the race issue was framed in the 2:00 hour before anybody knew who was getting shot, who was on the ground, what was happening. Already narrative was being rolled out at 2 p.m. By keyboard warriors. So the issue in journalism that I think we have right now is that a lot of people are writing and composing material and it's going viral and they're not even there. They're not on the ground like I am. And that's a problem because now you're getting distorted narrative from secondary sources and not primary sources like I am. I don't know if you could see it, but that's where you had the rafters on each side. Let me see if I can back up. This fence, it's kind of hard to tell, but you had the rafters or the bleachers that were set up for the inauguration. That's where everybody was climbing. And then we had to go up the terrace there. On the upper terrace behind them are some small windows. And that's where the dude came up to me, the John Fogerty guy who I talk about in the podcast. He came up to me and he was like, "You ready for the story of your life?" And he led me up. And I have video of that posted now on publicreport.org, and of me inside the Capitol. And here's the other thing. I have been contacted by law enforcement. I think anybody who is a blogger has been contacted by law enforcement. I think that's expected. I know that somebody got deplatformed because they had shot sensitive material in Pelosi's office. I was very careful when I was in there. I was not going to get, the worst thing that happened is, and I did tell them, is I bled on the furniture a little because they were breaking up this furniture and they were using it as like barricades and stuff. And I had cut my hand on broken glass. And so I did kind of bleed all over the place. I mean, it wasn't bad. It looked worse than it was, when it actually was. Let's see. I would like you to find out, Michelle, hey, find out more about some of the different Asians that you saw in the crowd. 45 seems to have huge support among evangelists. Yes, there's a lot of evangelists. All right, this is an interesting question because the diversity in the crowd. When I went to Sacramento, there were a lot of, you see the South Vietnamese flag flown a lot, and that's really significant. There's a lot of Vietnamese and Chinese and Taiwanese. Hong Kong Chinese, Taiwanese are anti-communist because they're against the mainland China regime. Same thing, South Vietnamese are anti-communist. So a lot of the flags that you see flown, there's an interesting article on Quartz where, and again, it's these millennial bloggers are trying to break it down. In their credit, they're breaking down all the flags and explaining them because there were a ton of flags and everybody's like, what do they mean? What do they mean? I didn't find any flags that were subversive. They were actually all mainstream, and I would maintain even the Confederate flag. Brett and I on the podcast had a little moment. I was like, how much do we disagree? Because he definitely was classifying that in the racist category. And I'm of the category, it has to be known what the intent of whoever is holding it is. there are obviously ways that you can use a Confederate flag in a racist fashion, but that's a bigger question. I don't know how deep we want to go into it. And the Quartz article, so the Quartz article is called like Decoding the Flags of the Trump Rally, and I found it interesting. And to the two young women's credit, when they got to the Confederate flag, they didn't automatically classify it as racism, and they even said that historically the flag isn't the flag of the Confederacy, but it was more of General Lee, and it goes into that. So I have to research it myself. We automatically jump to conclusions about what we think of some symbols and flags. And I think it always needs to be put in the context. In a context like that, where every flag was accepted, every flag, a Vietnamese flag, a Korean flag, there was even a flag from like Georgia, not Georgia the state, but like, so it goes through that in the Quartz article. It's really interesting. There's also a flag that needs to be clarified. It's called the Kek flag. It says K-E-K, and it's this weird internet bizarre, like, kind of like the Proud Boys almost, like where it's this weird inside joke among the alt-right, but it's not necessarily some kind of like, people were sharing it on Twitter and saying, see, it's a KKK flag, but it's a green flag where they worship the ancient Egyptian frog god called Kek. And it's this green flag and it says Kek. It's this weird internet joke. That flag was at the Capitol. So it was really any flag you want, you can bring. And that's one thing that Bret Weinstein point that he made is that Bret said that this group is terrible at policing certain things. But when you have a group of, 50,000 and you have, 3 or 4 guys spread out that through, that have some offensive shirt, it's really hard to call them out and notice it, let alone police it, because this group does not believe that expression should be policed. And that's where the Proud Boys get into trouble, because they just feel like they should say whatever how they want. And then millennial bloggers go crazy, and so you get keyboard warriors that have been after them, and that's why their image. That's why everybody thought they were white supremacists when they are moderates. And in the interviews that I have had with them, they are moderates, and you want them. You want moderates of that movement to keep the real extremists, like the neo-Nazi that I do interview, who claims responsibility. He says that he said he led the attack with 20 people against the mainstream media pen. And he also espoused views of white nationalism. But he was, by God, I told the live stream, I said, I found one, finally, an actual self-identifying extremist or fascist, really. And he was pro-coup. He said he wanted a coup. But that's like one guy. And I think he was hanging around here at night because he kind of wanted to take credit, He didn't want to be erased from, and sort of, it's almost like, how like they always say that serial killers like hang around at the scene of the crime. So that's the 4th interview on publicreport.org/Capitol with an O, is the self-proclaimed, he was from California too. He was like, I'm from the communist state of California. And I'm like, I'm from California. So a lot of the flags, we're talking about those Asian nation flags, it's actually what binds them together is their anti-communism. They're anti-communist China. A Cuban flag was there. The 2 girls from Quartz, I call them girls, young women from Quartz were like, we couldn't figure out why these international flags were there. It's because they're anti-communist, And what Trump stands for and what the conservatives, have always stood for is anti-communism, because we on the left are really bad at saying no to communism, in the sense that distancing ourselves from it, because socialism becomes equated with it and you get into this whole political quagmire. But I saw Hammer and Sickles when I marched in Denver. And as I told Bret, I think twice, and I'll say it again, I saw a guy with a Stalin tattoo. But how would it look if you took the one guy with a shoulder Stalin tattoo and you said, this is all of Black Lives Matter? You would be wrong. Not everybody who shows up is there for a Stalinist agenda. So Let's go look at the memorial and check that out. I talk a lot, I guess. Think of as a Confederate flag is a battle flag. Well, that's the other thing that I pointed out to Brett is they don't. It doesn't mean that they're saying, "Hey, racism." They might be saying Civil War or battle. Battle of the what do they call it? What? So, in other words, the other phrase that I heard was somebody said 1776 will commence again, and that was that Alex Jones phrase from the Pierce Morgan interview. And I think I heard that twice, 1776 and 1776 will commence again. Among libertarian, small government, patriot movement types, they're really much against, or they say that they don't want big government. And COVID regulations have had a lot to do with that from what I've seen. I'm going to show you the memorial here. This is to Officer Sicknick. So this is the officer that died in the Wednesday rioting. It's really interesting to see the diversity of people who are here. That was really interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see if that image comes out. I can't really see what I'm streaming the way the multi-stream works, but it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. That image of the old Native American woman and the rollerblader sort of paying tribute. All right. How many of the rioters would you classify as LARPers? If it did not seem like anyone had a plan, they got to instead Capitol. Yeah, there were a lot. The guy was definitely a LARPer. The John Fogerty guy, who was incanting Fortunate Son. And for those of you who didn't see the Brett Weinstein podcast, I talk about he walked up to me and he said, "Are you ready for history?" And he led me in, and he kept saying, "Where's my reporter at?" And he wanted me to document it. They were breaking up all this furniture. I had already cut my hand coming in, and then he gets everybody together, and he's kind of the ringleader, and he says, "It ain't me, I ain't Joe Biden's son." And he puts on the mask and then charges out into what the hell, like literally a dead end corridor with two offices. It was very weird. People did not know what the heck was going on. A lot of the LARPers, I imagine, were drawn into it spontaneously in the passion of the moment, so to speak. But there were people like the National Socialist Nazi guy that I interviewed who came and had studied Black Bloc tactics. And that's the very last interview. I make you enter a password agreeing that watching it does not mean that I platform this individual or espouse his views. I actually haven't posted a lot of, when he started getting hateful, just because I don't even know what I'm going to do with all that material. But yeah, the LARPers were not really prepared, but the people who made the breach happen were, like the guys with the zip ties, the paramilitaries. You could kind of differentiate the paramilitaries from the LARPers because they don't have Viking helmets on, or they don't have, they're a little less performative, So there is a difference, I would say, between the LARPers. For those of you who don't know what LARP means, of course, it's live action role play. The LARPers, I would say, are like the Viking guy, which everybody knows his whole history now. And of course, those guys get the headlines because they're the most performative, and they're interesting to talk about. I mean, I've talked about the John Fogerty guy a couple times now because he was such a character, and he's the one who brought me into it. So there was this performative element of it that I thought a lot of us were expecting. What we didn't expect was that the paramilitary people at the front would be so successful in whipping up the crowd's passion. Because when you have that critical mass, you can't handle it. I mean, there were tens of thousands of people, and ones all the way in the back when I first come in were saying, you could see on that first video, they say, "It's now or never, man. It's now or never." And the guy, someone wrote Javert. He looked like he had this long gray kind of ponytail. But when I first walked in, a woman says, I don't want to get tear gassed, and I'm kind of riffing on that in the first video on publicreport.org. Let's see what other questions we have here. Black Bloc marching in New York City. Thoughts? Yes. There was supposed to be, I was originally going to go to New York City today. There was originally going to be a MAGA march. After the Capitol riot, they canceled the MAGA march. But the Antifa, New York City Antifa, is a big actual Antifa group. In other words, they have it in their name, much like Sacramento and Berkeley and Rose City. They are an Antifa group in New York City. They have the biggest online presence. They didn't cancel their counter protest. So even though the MAGA people canceled, the Antifa people showed up. Now, the person who I think might be in a video because she got attacked, she's a well-known conservative blogger and somebody who I've seen around. I've seen the video, and there's no excuse for the way that she's attacked because she's assaulted, and you see the fanaticism that comes out when they think somebody is a Nazi. They're calling her Nazi. She's a Nazi. She even named, her organization and stuff. They knew it. They knew who she was. They knew that she was conservative. And she's next to the police, and the police really don't protect her. And even when she leaves, they follow her. So I haven't seen a lot of tape from New York. Was there more? Let me know. Feel free to send me links from New York. I just saw her post, and I watched that, and I saw it as typical of, if you're a conservative and the Black Bloc feels like doing that, they'll assault you if they have the numbers. I mean, that's what they get away on. And it was thuggish, it's sort of a thuggish attack. So that was my thoughts on New York. Whoever gave the order to police to stand down and let the rioters in should go to jail. There's another thing that we haven't talked about as much, or maybe some people have, which is they make all these comparisons, which in Brett Weinstein's podcast, I break down why their fault, the journalism, the activist journalism behind it isn't holding up. They're basically cherry picking and trying to make viral material so that the narrative goes viral and stuff. But another point that was made was police since June were adopted the crowd control theory, which is that you do stand down, that you don't, especially in cities where there have been rioting, like Portland and New York City, San Francisco, they, Los Angeles certainly too, you don't intervene. So I don't know that they were prepared to intervene, and could have, given the tens of thousands of people and the passion of the crowd. Um, let's see, what else do we got here? Uh, 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 Madness in the crowds, Lipers. More video coming out recently, and people are like, "This is worse than we thought." I always knew it was worse than you all thought, because I was there, and it was worse than. Again, the narrative that's set in holding the doors open was that bad. The narrative that set in was that people were just welcomed in. What happened was a 5-hour long ordeal with peaks and valleys to it, and there's a lot of stuff that didn't look good, but you have to understand, you have to know where that is in the timeline. If someone's already been shot and killed, if someone's been trampled, we don't know yet. The quarters were so cramped, and we were up on scaffolding. They knew people were scaling walls and putting a danger to themselves and others. At one point, there's a video of a person that literally is pushed somehow off the wall. So at that point, when you realize you have a situation where if you have a real, a situation where a lot of people can die quickly from suffocation or trampling, then that's why you do open the door and you say, okay, just come in, please, come in. I don't know. You have to have context for all of this. That's all I have to say, is when you look at the whole picture, and that's why I start the videos on publicreport.org, to show people right when I arrived, and that it was a music festival crowd, but not only that, an attitude. You could see how relaxed I was, and I was kind of cracking jokes, and it was because we had no idea, nobody had died yet. We saw tear gas plumes. We knew there were clashes up there, but we didn't know how serious it was going to get. We didn't know that someone was going to get shot within the hour and killed. And again, the populist story is what I've been telling, because that's the part that a lot of mainstream outlets have been leaving out. More video coming out recently. Yeah, I saw that one. There's something. One congressman already admitted they had intel beforehand the Capitol breach was going to happen. Interesting. Interesting. I'd be interesting to look that. This is part of the story I'm behind on. I'm going to admit it, which is the political. And we didn't get into it because that interview with Brett Weinstein was in 24 hours. No, I think 48 hours of the whole ordeal, and I had just been going all night and researching, but we hadn't gotten to that part of the story yet, which was who knew and how much did they know. The rhetoric was certainly there, and then maybe I'll post it. One of the flyers, showed the storm. It said "storm the Capitol," and it had a storm over the Capitol. But obviously, the double meaning is storm the Capitol. So who knew that it was meant? Am I still on? Yeah. All right, so that'd be interesting. I'd be really interested to know. The cops did the right thing standing down when they were not prepared with mass police presence. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. From what I have seen in other cities, and this is the point that people are making, that the police learned that if the quote unquote social contract is ripped, wasn't that the talking point that we were given back in June, was that the social contract was ripped, the people weren't represented as they should be, and so therefore you stand down. I don't understand why that wouldn't apply in this situation, especially given the geography of, you could see the Capitol behind me. It's really high up. I did not realize you don't just walk up on stairs like a state capitol. It's it was a dramatic scene because you had the rafters, and you can watch my video of me inside the rafters, inside the scaffolding, kind of monkey barring my way around. I mean, it was a really bizarre, surreal scene because it is high up on a hill, and you have to scale it. You don't just walk up the stairs. You have to scale the levels. So because of that, we were all in situations where we could have been pushed over something and we could have fallen. And I think one person, there is a video of somebody falling. So you don't want a situation where mass people are falling from the upper terrace to their deaths. So no narrative, watched it live, stand down, move away. Okay. But move the barricades and hold the doors. Never saw cops do that in Seattle. Yeah, I mean, look, maybe I'm not going to dismiss it. There's probably criticism to go around. Maybe they got a miscommunication. I'm not going to make excuses for them. They should be asked why. I will say, though, whether they did it nicely or they did it by, trying to control the crowd a little more, that crowd was getting in one way or another. It's just what it was. You just didn't have the numbers. Everything is about the numbers. Someone mentioned New York and that the conservative blogger lady was getting attacked. Well, she was getting attacked because she didn't have any numbers. It was just her and another conservative. And so it was 2 against a crowd of, 1 or 2 dozen. When you don't have the numbers, you get worked. I've seen that time and time again. Whoever's outnumbered, whatever tribe has the numbers, seizes on it. And it's simple as that. And that goes with police too. If the police don't have the number, if it's a black bloc of 10 people or whatever, against police, it's a cakewalk. It's just when you get critical mass. That's what I told Brett, and that's how I kind of address it on publicreport.org, is that, and characterize it, it was a critical mass of tens of thousands. CNN wrote hundreds of Trump supporters in their first article, which gives you the impression that it was just a couple of conservatives showed up and then the establishment said, oh, let them come in because of systematic racism or whatever. But that's the problem with these narratives, is they're not built on what was happening on the ground. So, you're going to have outlier situations, just like you're going to have outlier fringe performative people, fringe actual Nazis. As I said, I met one. I talked to him. I'd like to find out more. I tried to because he had given me an email, and I tried to get a hold of him. I would like to ask more questions, certainly. It was hard to tell, though, because he was also theorizing that there were some Antifa there. I think what he means is anarchists. There could be anarchists that were among the crowd that aren't, because anarchists don't have any loyalty to party. They just want to bring down the system. So if they got intel that it was going to go down, then some anarchists would show up. But Antifa is different. People who are anti-fascist and Antifa are politically social justice warriors. And it's important to know that, because that works. That's the whole punch a Nazi in the face movement that's been going on here in DC since January the 19th, the night before of 2017, the night before Trump was elected. And I posted on Twitter, you'll have to scroll down a bit to like a week ago, but I show the attack on January 19th from the Black Bloc. They're yelling anarchy now and foreclose the White House was another one. So Rep. Mo Brooks said on Newsmax. I'll look it up. It's just so funny that the woman for praying grandmas, when I asked her, I was like, what? I can't remember what question I asked, but she looks me dead in the eyes and she's like, watch Newsmax. And I was like, okay. Because I said, well, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to say by this? And she's like, watch Newsmax. Nobody take that out of context and edit it so that it looks like I'm promoting Newsmax. Because I'm not. I want to see what these signs are over here. Give you guys a better view of the Capitol and the reflecting pool here. But there's some signs here, but I find it interesting that they removed the memorials, so quickly for the 4 people who died. But it must have been that after the Patriots left. Oh, do you know what I wonder? I wonder if anybody has video of it. I wonder if it was removed by, well, I don't know. I don't want to speculate. I was at Black Lives Matter Plaza earlier, and all of the chalking said, no domestic terrorists. And it was all language about domestic terrorism, and the right being domestic terrorists, which is interesting. I mean, these two stories are so symmetrical. If you take out your beliefs, your ideology, what you think of as, and you just look at the tactics, how these movements unfolded, why they're akin to each other as being populist movements, why the working class is disenfranchised, why we have an economy that works for billionaires. And you see that it really doesn't matter ethnically where you're from. You're getting screwed no matter what, is what people feel in these two movements. So if we can get beyond the BS culture war and accept each other, so we have all, I love democracy, I love peace. These are all peaceful. In case no one else tells you today, you are loved. And it says, Black lives, brown lives, LGBTQIA plus lives, trans lives, sex workers' lives, addicts' lives, immigrants' lives, brown lives, Moms for Social Justice, TC. And you know, that people have different cultural expressions. When I was in college, it was not that elaborate. And I was a theater student, and certainly we had such social justice then. It just wasn't as complex. I just think, welcome, Joe and Kamala, equality, justice wins, peace. There's more peace signs than I've ever seen before. It was mostly anarchy signs. There's a political one. Hold them accountable. Cruz, Nunes, Hawley, Gates, Brooks, Jordan, A. Harris. Nearly 70, shortly after arriving in the U.S., my dad took us to visit the U.S. Capitol. This great symbol of democracy was accessible and open to the people. To see it overrun by a dangerous mob and now surrounded by this fence is shocking and weighs on my heart. Energetic wisdom, love over hate, love wins, terrorism fails. Okay, this is so interesting. Watch all of them. No echo chambers. Amen. Does Antifa just an idea, or are they organized? They are organized, very organized, but they are not a singular. This is the most important point. Anarchism is the idea. You can say that anarchism, the tactics and the idea of anarchism are what it's transmutable. It can be appropriated. So the idea of anarchism and freedom and liberation, which I would make the case you saw in practice in Portland, those tactics and that spirit of anarchism made its way here. So anarchism is the idea. Anti-fascism is a clear political left movement. And the Antifa groups are individual groups. The biggest ones, the most active ones, again, New York City Antifa, Berkeley Antifa, Antifa Sacramento, Rose City Antifa, Atlanta Antifa. And they're networked by a group called Torch Network. And Torch Network is based on the old Anti-Racist Action Network, which started between the gang wars in the club scene. The anarcho-punks in the Midwest and upper Midwest would battle it out as a club turf war with the neo-Nazis, the skinhead neo-Nazis. So you had skinhead anti-fascists who were anarchists, and then you had skinhead neo-Nazis, and they would fight each other. Then this one group called the Baldies decided to start a large network. And in their heyday, according to radio broadcast that I listened to, that they had 100 chapters across the U.S. of anti-racist action. Well, anti-racist action fell apart in the 90s, but then in the 2007, Rose City Antifa was formed, and Torch Antifa came around it. These are all individual quote-unquote cells. They're individual. They're not. There's not one centralized leader. That's why if you go to leftist Twitter, people make jokes all the time that and in their bio it'll say CEO of Antifa, or it'll say, Director of Operations, Antifa. Because they know that there's not one centralized part of Antifa. So that explains that. And that explains Joe Biden's error in calling it an idea. He's 100% wrong in that. And he should have been taken to task for it. But it says, welcome, Joe and Kamala. We love you. We heart you. This one says, thank you, Stacey Abrams. Interesting. Well, this is a Dem city. So, this hate has no home. I don't know that people were there in hate. I really do think that they were rallying for love of country. That was my impression. I did not see any hateful imagery on Wednesday, except there's one guy that Brett and I talked about, that his hoodie was particularly anti-Semitic. Let's see. Echo chambers, like the mafia, meaning Antifa. I guess kind of. But even the mafia has capos. They have even the mafia has like a don, or they have some sort of hierarchy. These are horizontally organized, and they use anarchist ideas, so they're non-hierarchical. So nobody's in charge, and when you have nobody in charge, that's why you get nothing done and are a big joke at some points. But then other times there's advantages to leaderless movements because you don't know who to arrest. Vote early and often. Democracy is diversity. So this is all, okay, here we're getting into the fuck off fascism. Well, guys, I'm going to cancel this. There are leaders within Antifa, yes, but they're not. They're elders, I would say, that are the most influential. Actually, I'd make the case are the press Antifa, people who are in the press that identify themselves as radical Antifa, anti-fascist, who are members of the mainstream press. That's where I would put the focus on as far as Antifa's influence. Maybe not declared leaders. Well, there's some locally. And again, it's what I told Brett. I said to Brett, this is not one big national story. It's hard to approach it as one big national story, even though it has national implications. It's really 24 local stories, down to like Rockville, Illinois. Somebody told me they were in like Fort Wayne or something and watching riots happen. So you had all of these pockets where localized groups decided to go and mobilize, and because of Twitter, you can do that. So the trick is how to make. I mean, activist communities seem like they're here to stay, in the sense that they've always been here. I mean, activism is a part of this country, but how do we have reasonable activism in which we can attain common goals, and not everybody's just a fascist or a Nazi. Automatically, just because they're conservative. You need conservatism in some cases. You want that, Everybody's diversity of ideas are fine. This is a beautiful picture of the... I think I'm going to sign off pretty soon. This was interesting to just kind of review. Follow me on Twitter at JLeeQuinn if you don't already. I'll take a couple more questions what do we have to say? If Antifa were legit, they wouldn't need to try so hard to be perceived as if Antifa were legit. Yeah, I mean, they're. I don't really know what the threat level is at this point in Portland, because it's fanaticism. it's always elevated. And the inauguration day, what I'm asking is, I don't know what's going to happen here for inauguration day, and I don't know where I'll be. But I think we have to just kind of wait and see. My hope is that more dialogue happens between people who don't agree with each other, that we start getting more conversations. Again, I'm encouraging, and I will write letters to media contacts saying, please hire diversity of ideas. It's important that we start working with each other, and trying to understand the other side of the story, not just our own, and not our own ideology. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Stay safe. Everybody stay safe too. Take care. Did you see the news display? Yes. White supremacist mainstreamist Christian racist narrative. So the news is complicated, obviously, because it has a double meaning. It also has a Western thing to it. And I'm not being an apologist for it. I'm against it, just like I was against the guillotine. But it's very similar that one group, how are we not seeing the symmetry here? One group rolls out a guillotine and another group rolls out a stage with a noose on it. Now, there are people theorizing that this was real, that they were going to hang people and so forth. I don't see that being feasible, let alone hopefully, people aren't psychotic enough to be entertaining that. You ask yourself, well, why do they have the zip ties? Is it performative? Is it if they ran into anybody who they saw as a threat, whether that be Antifa or otherwise? Well, I don't know. Is it bad? Yes, of course it's bad that two guys had zip ties. It's very bad. You don't want that. I think we can all agree on that. But the stage thing is more complicated because it has that old Western sheriff kind of thing too, of the this is how we do it. I mean, look, it's not great imagery. It sucks, and again, you denounce it just like you denounce the guillotine. But I don't know that you can say that it's explicitly a racial thing. But that's how this works with the subculture stuff. It's coded, it's not explicit. If you've watched V for Vendetta, it's the same sort of thing, that in anarchists, the symbol is more than just a symbol. People read history into that. Some might read racist history, and some might read, sort of the what is the saying? That kind of hard justice or something, that they're going to hold the leaders accountable. The corrupt, it's the corrupt, the sheriff or whatever, or the corrupt. Some might mean it. I don't know. I don't want to go too deep in the stage with a noose. It's not good. Again, you don't want it. You don't want guillotines either. There are symbols that I think we don't need as a country if we just start to talk about what we agree on and get away from the culture war. What do you mean legit? They're anarchists. Having centralized leadership would be counter to the philosophy. legit anarchists. I can't even remember what I said. But would Antifa be legit? Well, not all Antifa are anarchists. And that's something that I learned early on. A lot of anarchists are anti-fascists, but not all Antifa are necessarily anarchists. And that's why these Antifa groups are sort of hard to pin down, because they're different. Again, Washington, D.C. doesn't have an Antifa group. It has 4 other groups, one called the They Them Collective, one called Shutdown D.C., a group called All Out D.C., and a group called the D.C. Youth Liberation Front. So you have these different radical groups that are operating that are not necessarily Antifa and not necessarily anarchist. In fact, DC's culture, I would call more social justice black bloc, anti-fascist aligned, but not necessarily anarchists. If they were true anarchists, they probably would have showed up on Wednesday. If they were really anarchists. I've been trying to find a classical anarchist to give me a comment about Wednesday as to how they use the anarchist tactics. And going against the government is, of course, they don't like it because Trump they see as a semi-fascist of some sort. There's some more comments. I thought it said I was going to go. Crazies on both sides. They will take it easy. George Soros fund Antifa. In my opinion, no. But he funds certain groups that can have social justice warrior cultural authoritarianism to. Like people that belong to those groups can easily show up at a protest and come in black bloc if they want and partake in Antifa stuff. That's why I say it's our culture on the left that we have to be honest about what's going on. But as far as George Soros funding it top down for the purpose of Antifa, in my opinion, you asked, that's no, and it's very hard to explain to conservatives. And it's an easy answer, and that's why they like it. But it's a problematic one, of course. But his money does go to certain groups. And if someone were really to parse that and look at all the groups that Soros's money goes to, the way you would build a story like that is you would look at the groups that he gives money to. Then you would search their entire Twitter history. And you would search when they posted certain flyers and how inflammatory their flyers were for certain riot actions. Was the group posting flyers that were mainstream? For example, today I walked through the park in DC and it was very mainstream activists doing mutual aid, distributing goods to the homeless, and actual on the ground stuff. So there was a legit community action. So the question becomes, do those organizations, or can you prove that an organization is more than just community action, but is actually involved in direct action, direct riot action, in other words? But for the most part, those are very sort of fringe subcultural groups that, as far as I know, are not Soros funded. But someone would have to, again, go through Twitter and prove that a certain group was. And nobody's done that work. So I cannot say, and I don't think anyone can legitimately say that. It really is no more or less than speculation. The one thing I will say for the right is they were emotionally beat up by their leaders, because lies. Yeah, maybe. I don't know what you mean. What do we have? I see the symmetry too. I hope more start to. Yeah, I think so too. What is there to fund? Shields. Yes, I've said that so many times. When people keep saying, is Antifa funded? And I said, how much does it cost to rent a U-Haul, for a day? It needs to, that $85 needs to be funded by someone. No, these are able-bodied people like myself. I invested thousands of dollars. Look, I'm a dude in my 40s and, I got laid off. And so I invested my own money to go travel around the country and find the truth. When you believe in, because I believe in it, when you believe in something, you will spend, a couple $100 or a couple, even $1,000 maybe, because you believe in it and you're at a point in your life where it's worth it to invest that money and find out what's going on. Or for some people who are activists that are very strong in their beliefs, to go out and rent a U-Haul or get some, plywood at the Home Depot for these shields. It's very low, income. The thing that's significant are the bail funds, but the bail funds seem organic. A point I make is that the Portland bail fund stands at $1.3 million or so. But when you do the math of the number of contributions on the GoFundMe page and you divide it in, it comes out to like $40, $45 per contribution. So that means that it's probably very realistically just like suburban moms and dads that believe in it or think that something's wrong and they donate or what have you. But individual donations, that's what Bernie Sanders showed when, the Bernie Revolution came. I'm a Bernie voter, is that you could have a candidate who wasn't bought off, and that individual contributions. Look, there's a lot of positives here in activism on both sides, that both sides are politically engaged, that they are willing to put so much passion into being politically engaged. It doesn't have to be passion that's directed towards opposition. It could be passion that's directed towards agreement. The trick is, how do we harness that? How do we get people to really agree and put passion behind where we agree, not just where we disagree. Most armed people in the country, but when they go to take over the country, they're not armed. I find that fascinating. I find that given the demographic that was here on Wednesday, but you probably don't want federal gun charges because you're going onto federal property with a gun. I mean, you'd be risking a lot of time for that. The mass gives you. That's why I say this was a populist riot. It wasn't a populist riot or a populist insurrection, much like the symmetrically we saw over the summer. Again, throw away where your beliefs are and what is what. I'm saying what it was and what it represented to that political sphere. So, the most armed people in the country. I'll bet you what happened is because they're going crazy on social media about, look, this guy. A lot of performative people probably took pictures of their guns and said, "Yep, I'm packing up old whatever, old Yeller away, and I'm putting it in the pickup." Or, But did they actually show up with guns? I saw no guns. I keep telling people that I didn't see a single gun on Wednesday. The arrest, according to the arrest, there were 5. One for a illegal gun, possibly a long gun, I don't know, but then 4 on suspicion of unlicensed firearms, which would probably mean a handgun. So, of the tens of thousands that there were 5 and I saw none, I think there's more to that story. I have written an explicit information request to Metropolitan Police here and to the Capitol Police, to the federal police. And so who knows if they'll answer me. But I'm going to try to get an answer on that because I think that's significant. If any of you follow Unblocked Podcast, my podcast, in which I did the joint talk New Year's Eve between a Black Lives Matter leader and a Proud Boys leader, you can go. You see the logo there. Unblocked Podcast on YouTube. Actually, I think I have everything up. I also have the interview with Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio. Again, I investigated the Proud Boys first. I thought they were the ones during Black Lives Matter that were agitating. So I investigated them in Tulsa on this YouTube channel for Unblocked Podcast. My first video I post is me tailing the Proud Boys in Tulsa, which I tell Tarrio about in the interview. I was like, yeah, I tailed some of your guys, and there's surreal scenes in that video. You want to watch it, especially when the Bob Marley music comes out and people start smoking blunts. That's the other thing. All those pictures of people smoking blunts in the Capitol, like there's all this cultural stuff that was going on of rebellion and being a rebel that has nothing to do with racism. That's why the real story is so much more interesting than the story that the social justice keyboard warriors came up with at 2 p.m. while it was still unfolding. The story from the ground where you actually talk to the people and you say, who are these weirdos lighting up a blunt? Who's the Jewish guy from Brooklyn with the pelts on in the rotunda, talking about how he believes the election is stolen or whatever. The characters are much different than just, they're all racists. And right now, what we're getting from our media is, they're all racists. And that's not working. And that's why they're rebelling, is because media is bought against them. They believe, and I'll tell you, I've seen evidence to, and tech just started purging, various Facebook accounts. The Walk Away account, as I mentioned earlier, which had some 50,000 members or whatever. All these testimonials of people. The campaign was a gay. His name's Brandon, a gay one-time Democrat who walked away because he was tired of all the social justicing, and he started this campaign. And I was worried about it because I wanted Biden to win. And I was like, this campaign has some fire to it. But Facebook shut the whole thing down just because they were here and promoted the march. And so they just shut down the whole page. And I don't think we want to be in a situation like that where tech, oligarchs, so to speak, are big tech are making decisions like that. So are there troops guarding? Yes, there were National Guard troops on the other side that are stationed at the big fence. I'm over by the reflecting pool now, but there are guards. I probably get to these questions really late and people are probably gone by the time I get to them. I miss Bernie. I miss Bernie too. A little tip. I don't know if who in here is looked up my old work, but I used to be a comedian in the New York comedy scene, and I would do political comedy. So there's two impressions of me doing Bernie Sanders. And one of them was during the summer of Bernie. I think he was still at like polling at like 11% or lower, but he started to pick up. Or as soon as he got into double digits, like people started to get excited about Bernie. And ironically, I do this video where I'm walking around LA seeing if Bernie will connect with minorities. And it's a comedy video. And I predicted that the joke was that if he could just use memes, who knew that one day we would use memes for a radical social rebellion? But that video is prescient and it's out there and it's interesting. All small contributions, exactly. Someone said the media immediately started denying voting irregularities as having no basis, and to get the right stirred up. Is it likely? Yes, it's likely. I've said this time and time again. I've said, do not dismiss the right's concerns ever. Let them be heard, seek them out. Do not be a protectionist. We cannot on the left be protectionists, whether we're media, whether with any of this. The protectionist left ultimately is going to lead to more distrust, and everything is going to keep boomeranging back. And that's all of these cancellations, all these people who are being fired just for being there, not even for stealing anything or breaking anything, but for just being there. The social justice warriors are keyboard warrioring and saying that this was a hateful domestic terrorist march and therefore everybody should be canceled. It's bullshit. Categorically. I was there. I saw what the people were. Any of these people that are launching these campaigns, now I'm getting passionate. You're allowed to be. On a podcast, you are. On publicreport.org, I'm very empirical about the data that I present. But on a podcast, I can say this. Categorically, I saw nothing that was hateful about the chants that were going on. We the people, we, USA, of course. It was all this sort of patriotic movement stuff. So the idea that this was a hate-based movement is just, I need to go back. I need to go back and find out for how long they've been misportrayed. Because Charlottesville was a problem. You know, you had actual ethno-nationalists. So at that point, you can say that they're haters when they're running around with tiki torches, and so forth at a university. Or was it the university or the park? I have to look at all of Charlottesville again and see what was going on, because my understanding was Charlottesville wasn't okay. Now we're getting to Charlottesville. You had two Charlottesville marches, right? You had the evening with the tiki torches, which was clearly white nationalist youth, and that was the scary thing. Was the nighttime Charlottesville protest was ethno-nationalist in nature. When we heard the "You will not replace us" and "Jews will not replace us" and stuff like that. I've only heard the "You will not replace us." I've been told by those who study, but I need to find the video where it says "Jews will not." I heard a lot of "You will not replace us," but that's because also I looked more at the video during the day. During the day, they were saying you will not replace us, and they changed. So the people who were there at Charlottesville at the daytime protests were not all ethno-nationalists. Some were normie MAGA Trump supporters, some were militia, some were the ethno-nationalists. Now the ethno-nationalists got all the video because that was the exciting video. Their shields, their, how do you decode what they're, what they're all about and stuff. And we actually do know that some people in Charlottesville were KKK. That's been well documented. So there were ethno-nationalists there. But there were also regular MAGA people that weren't ethno-nationalists there. That's why we can't paint with a broad brush with any of this. That's why you can't call every Black Lives Matter supporter a communist or a Marxist. It's just not going to work, because all it does is you take a whole chunk of the country, half, and you label it by one broad stroke, and it just creates division after division. And then you get in Facebook arguments where you're pulling one little thing and saying, see, I told you. And then your friend pulls another thing and says, see, I told you. And then you pull another one. And that's all that goes around the country. And it's ridiculous. So going back, do I think that voter fraud happens? Yes, I think that there is some. And because of that, that's always a check and balance. If one party says, hey, I think there was voter fraud, let's investigate, I think the other party should always say, okay, what do we got? And I said that from the beginning with Trump. I said, just let him keep going. If he has something, then don't be afraid of it, because the truth is the truth. But it's more than likely he has nothing. So don't get in the way of him challenging, because you can just use that as propaganda otherwise to convince people that the establishment is set against you. It is wrong to dismiss things so quickly. Go ahead, honor them, say we will honor this. We have no information yet, but the press is protectionist and they're all scared. What do we got here? Hangman Pence was also chanted. Yes, when they found out that Pence did not go along with any sort of dramatic Trump plan, they did chant hang Mike Pence. Just like Villain went after Lindsey Graham, who knows? The nooses were there symbolically for whoever was against their perception. There's a fanaticism about it. Don't get me wrong. I think that there are bogus elements, absolutely, but you should not discount the people of the United States of America and why they're feeling that way. That's what we were told with Black Lives Matter too. We were said, you shouldn't say, oh, that person's rioting, that person's looting. You have to ask yourself why they're doing it. Well, okay, shouldn't we do that now as well? Shouldn't we ask ourselves, why are the people attacking the Capitol? I'm not saying it's right, but if we were going to ask that, the articles that you'll trust, and there's probably not many out there, but you'll be able to trust them, is if they actually let the people be heard, in the sense that anti-globalization, anti-big tech, anti-biased corporate media. Those are the three main things. Oh, and anti-government reach, meaning for them, COVID restrictions. I think you should have some COVID restrictions, but for them, government overreach is they consider anti-libertarian and tyrannical and killing small businesses. That's their point of view. So if you have articles that are written saying this is about race, I categorically challenge that article and say, were you there? How many people did you talk to? Because if you talk to nobody and you're just writing articles based on your prism of how you view the Republican Party, and then cherry picking to make the whole everybody who follows Trump look like a racist, then that's I challenge your article. That's it. So, all right, this is spam. How are you doing? Spam. We're getting spam. Why are we getting spam? How are you doing? This is spam too. Yeah. Oh man, we just got spammed. All spam. All right, I'm gonna call it, you guys. I'm freezing. I didn't bring gloves on this trip. If I come back for the inauguration, I will. Follow me. Check out publicreport.org and the new page I just put up, publicreport.org/capital with an O, or it's up in the top left if you go to publicreport.org. Check out Unblocked Podcast. Please subscribe to Unblocked Podcast on YouTube. I think I also have a SoundCloud out there, but YouTube is the main channel for that. Also on Facebook, there's publicreport.org, which is Facebook, and Twitter. Please join me on Twitter, everybody, because I'm going to have more material that I'll be releasing. That's the best place to get updates. Thank you as well. And, keep the questions coming, keep the dialogue coming, keep talking to people who do not think exactly like you. And there's going to be hope for this country, because I am patriotic. I am also sympathetic to activists and their concerns on both sides of this political spectrum. I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn. You guys, good night. Thank you for joining me live for the aftermath here in Washington, D.C. Have a good night.